On the night of August the 31st, 1997, in the Pont de la Alma tunnel in Paris, investigators later established one fact that almost everyone has quietly forgotten. Before the Mercedes struck that 13th pillar, it touched another car first, a white Fiat Uno. Not a theory, not a tabloid rumor, a finding confirmed by paint traces and by broken glass on the road in both the French judicial investigation and, years later, in Britain's own Operation Paget. Sit with that for a moment. The most examined car crash in human history has one loose thread that neither government, after years of work and millions of pounds spent, could ever tie off. They proved the car was there. They never found the car. And there's one name that came to be connected in the years afterward to a white Fiat Uno, a man investigators did look at. What happened around that man is one of the strangest footnotes in the entire file. We'll get there. But not yet, because I want to do this carefully, and I want to be honest with you from the very first minute about what this is and what it isn't. So let me say it plainly, up front. The official conclusion in both inquiries was that this was a terrible accident, caused by speed and by a driver who was over the limit. And I want to be clear, the evidence broadly supports that conclusion. I'm not here to sell you a plot. There is no secret cabal at the end of this video. This is not that channel, and this is not that story. This is a story about one gap. One unresolved fact sitting inside thousands of pages of otherwise thorough work. And it's a story I want to tell with respect for the woman at the center of it, and for everyone who died that night. Because here's the thing that makes this so strange. It's not the presence of a mystery. It's the absence of one, everywhere except this single point. Let's start with the contradiction the official record built for itself. Both inquiries reached the same conclusion: accident, no evidence of a plot to cause it. And the same inquiries confirmed, as a matter of physical fact, that a second vehicle made contact with the Mercedes and then left the scene. Hold those two findings in your hands at the same time. On one side, nothing suspicious was established. On the other, a car we could never identify made contact with the most famous passenger in the world and drove off into the night and was never traced. Now, both of those can technically be true. An accident can absolutely involve a second car that panics and flees. That happens. But do you see the problem it creates? When an official story closes every single door and leaves exactly one door open, the public doesn't look at all the doors that are shut. They look at the one that isn't. Forever. You can answer 99 questions perfectly, and the room will still only remember the 100th. That's not a flaw in the public. That's just how attention works. So we've got two doors out of this, and I want to be scrupulously fair with both of them, because both are genuinely plausible, and I'm not going to pretend one is obvious. Door number one. It was a random motorist, an ordinary person in an ordinary little car who clipped the Mercedes without ever intending to, felt the impact, glanced in the mirror, saw something horrifying beginning to happen behind them, and did the very human, very cowardly, very forgivable thing. They kept driving. They went home. And then they watched the news the next morning and realized what they'd been part of. And they were so frightened, so certain no one would ever believe it was an accident, that they simply never came forward. Not that year, not ever. Utterly innocent, utterly human. A person who made one panicked decision in 1 second and then had to live inside it for the rest of their life. That is completely believable. I want you to feel how believable it is. Paris at that hour, a driver who'd maybe had a drink themselves, a flash of headlights, a bang they didn't fully understand until morning, and then the pure animal terror of realizing who was in the car behind them. Most of us like to think we'd have stopped. Be honest with yourself about whether that's actually true at 3 a.m. with your heart in your throat. Fear does ugly, ordinary things to ordinary people. Door 1 asks nothing supernatural of anybody. It just asks you to believe a frightened person stayed frightened. Now door number 2. Not a conspiracy. I said I wasn't going to do that, and I meant it. Door 2 is simpler and, in a way, more uncomfortable. Door 2 is that the failure to ever locate one specific car in the most resourced, most expensive, most determined investigation of the entire century points to a gap in the investigation itself. Not a cover-up, a limit. The possibility that even the best in the world, given everything, still couldn't do the one thing that would have closed the case. So let me actually ask you, and I want a real answer in the comments, not a reflex. Which is genuinely easier to believe? An innocent driver who stayed completely silent for nearly 30 years, through every appeal, every documentary, every anniversary, and never once cracked. Or the world's most capable investigators simply losing a car? Pick one. Tell me below. Because I've turned this over 100 times and I still can't land cleanly on either. And that discomfort, that exact feeling you have right now, that's the whole story. Hold on to it. Now let me show you what was actually staked on getting this closed cleanly, because it matters, and it wasn't money. Operation Paget, Britain's investigation, reportedly cost several £1 million and ran for years. Years. And the French judicial inquiry came before it and ran its own long course. Think about why a government spends that. They weren't trying to solve a whodunit. They'd already concluded it wasn't one. They were spending all of that to do something much harder, to reassure the public, to lay every rumor one by one to rest, so that a grieving country could finally close the book. So the stakes were never financial. The stakes were institutional trust. Two governments needed the public to accept 3 words: case closed. And here's the cruel mechanism. Every single unresolved detail, the fiat above all, became a withdrawal from that trust account. It didn't matter how sound the overall conclusion was. Every open thread was a small debt against, "We've handled this." And you can be right on the headline and still bleed credibility on the footnote. That's what happened here. The more they proved, the more that one unproven thing stood out against everything around it. And understand who was watching that account. This wasn't a car crash on a quiet road that a coroner signs off in an afternoon. This was the death of the most photographed woman on the planet, a princess, a mother of a future king, in a foreign country, in circumstances involving press cars and a chauffeur and a nightclub and a tunnel. The whole world was leaning over the shoulder of these investigators. Every finding was going to be read in 40 languages and argued about for decades. In that environment, a single loose end doesn't stay a loose end. It gets pulled and pulled and pulled by millions of hands at once. The investigators knew that, which is precisely why the one thing they couldn't resolve became so much heavier than its actual size. Okay, this is the moment I promised you at the start. Let's open the vault, and I need you to watch me handle this with real care, because we are about to walk right up to the line, and I am not going to cross it. In the years after the crash, investigators examined a man who owned a white Fiat Uno that matched some of the characteristics in the findings. That is on the record. He was looked at. And the matter, I'm choosing these words precisely, did not resolve into any charges. Questions around that period have been discussed, in the inquiries and in the press, for a very long time. I am not going to tell you that man did anything wrong, because that was never established, and it would be wrong of me to imply it. He was examined. It went nowhere. That's the honest sentence, and that's the only sentence I'll give you. But here's why this is the knockout, and listen closely, because it's not what you think. The knockout isn't an accusation. The knockout is the vacuum. Think about what we're dealing with. In this entire case, the single most identifiable piece of physical evidence is that car. Not a blurry impression, not a witness's shaky memory. A specific make, a specific model, a specific color, white, literally named in the official findings of 2 nations. Of everything in this file, that is the one thing you could put out on a poster. And it still leads nowhere. Do you understand how strange that is? In a case examined this exhaustively, with this much money, this much time, this much expertise, the most concrete, most searchable, most nameable object in the whole story is the one object that was never recovered. Think about what investigators can normally do with a make, a model, and a color. Registration databases. Body shop records, because a car that clips a Mercedes at speed carries damage, and damage gets repaired or scrapped, and repairs and scrappage leave paperwork. Owner interviews, traffic sightings. That's a needle in a haystack, yes, but it's a metal needle, and they had a magnet the size of 2 governments. And still, nothing that closed it. In an ordinary case, leads nowhere is boring. It's a Tuesday. In the most investigated crash in history, leads nowhere is the single most extraordinary fact in the entire file. The dog that didn't bark. The one search, in a case built entirely on searching, that came back empty. If you want more royal stories told exactly like this, carefully, with the receipts, and without somebody trying to sell you a fairy tale in either direction, do me a favor and subscribe. It genuinely helps this kind of measured coverage survive. That's the only time I'll ask. Now let's keep going, because we've moved from the car to something bigger. Because the real flaw here isn't a person's. It's institutional. It's in how authorities handle a death that is also a national wound. Watch the reflex. When something this raw happens, the instinct of the state is to produce a report so long, so heavy, so exhaustive that its very weight is supposed to say the word finished. Thousands of pages. Every rumor cataloged and addressed. Every wild theory taken seriously enough to be knocked down in writing. And I understand the instinct. It comes from a good place, from wanting to leave nothing unanswered. But the length becomes the flaw. Because when you formally document every question except the one you genuinely cannot answer, you don't bury that question underneath all the others. You do the opposite. You frame it. You put a spotlight on it. Completeness, meant to reassure, ends up highlighting the single incompleteness. The thoroughness is exactly what makes the one gap impossible to miss. A short report you'd forgive for missing something. A report that answers everything is the one report where a missing answer screams. And that leads straight into why the public reassurance didn't fully land. The official message, boiled down, was this: all credible evidence has been examined. No evidence of a conspiracy was found. And I want to be fair, that is true, as far as it goes. They did examine an enormous amount. They did not find a plot. That's real. But here's why the reassurance still didn't close the public's mind. And it's subtle, so stay with me. We found no evidence is not the same sentence as we found the car. Say those two out loud. We found no evidence of a conspiracy. We found the car. They are different sentences. And the public heard the difference instantly, even if they couldn't articulate it. An appeal to trust only works when it answers the actual question that's being asked. And the actual question, the small, stubborn human question, was never, was there a conspiracy? It was, where's the car? The inquiries answered 100 questions beautifully. They just kept answering the ones nobody was really losing sleep over. Which brings me to the part I want to say flatly, without any drama, because it deserves to be said flatly. We tell ourselves a comforting story about the truth. We tell ourselves that with enough resources, enough time, enough experts, and enough will, the truth always fully surfaces in the end. That nothing important can stay hidden if we just look hard enough. The most investigated accident in modern history is the standing proof that sometimes it just doesn't. Not completely, not all of it. And I want to be so careful here, because this is the moral of the whole thing and it is easy to twist. The lesson is not that there was a plot. The lesson is humbler than that, and honestly, more unsettling. It's that even total investigative firepower, two governments, years, millions, the best forensic minds available, can leave one plain fact permanently unresolved, and that we have to learn, somehow, to live beside that gap. Not to fill it with a story we made up because the emptiness is unbearable, just to let it be an unanswered question, and to be at peace with not knowing. That's a hard thing to ask of people. It might be the hardest thing in this whole case. So let me tell you where all of this stands now, alone. The inquiries are closed. The officials who ran them have retired. The file, for all practical purposes, is dormant. It can't be reopened without genuinely new evidence, and there is none. The witnesses who reported seeing a Fiat that night have aged. Some of them have since died, taking whatever they saw with them. And the car itself, if it even still exists somewhere in the world, is scrapped by now. Rusted, crushed, melted down years ago. The one piece of steel that could have answered the only question anyone still asks has quietly rusted its way out of reach. And the world simply moved on around the empty space where it should have been. And there is one more thing I have to say here, and I want to say it with real respect. Diana's own sons, William and Harry, have asked, repeatedly and pointedly, for their mother to be allowed to rest, to stop being a case file, to stop being turned over and over by people who never knew her. And that is a request this channel honors completely. I'm not doing this to disturb her memory. I'm doing it because there is a genuine, documented gap in an official record. And I think you can discuss a gap in a public investigation while still treating the human being at the center of it with dignity. If I ever thought I couldn't do both at once, I wouldn't make this video. I hope you feel that I've tried. So here's where we actually end. The investigations cannot be reopened without new evidence, and the physical trail has long since gone cold beyond any hope of recovery. That is the true point of no return, not a locked vault someone's hiding the key to, just time, just rust, just witnesses growing old, and a little car that was probably scrapped before most of you watching this were even born. Let me leave you with the honest version of all of it, straight to camera, no theatrics. The official conclusion is an accident, and the evidence broadly supports it. I want that to be the last clear thing you hear me say, because it's true. But one car, named in the findings, its color and model on the official record, confirmed to have made contact, was never found. I am not asking you to believe a conspiracy. I'm genuinely not. I'm asking you something much simpler and much quieter than that. In the most investigated crash in the history of the world, how does a whole car just disappear? Tell me what you make of it, respectfully, please. This one more than any other down in the comments. Door 1, the frightened innocent driver who never spoke. Or door 2, the gap in the machine. I read them, and on this story I'll be reading carefully. And if there's one more Diana story that shows just how far people were willing to go to get a piece of her, how a single forged document, faked to look real, opened a door that never should have been opened, and how the BBC itself spent years reckoning with what one of its own men did to reach her, that thread is the next one I'm pulling. It's a different kind of gap, and in some ways a darker one. It's waiting for you right here. I'll see you in it.